Welcome to Charge the Wave, focused on entrepreneurs, executives, and icons who are giving it their all to build companies, cultures, and communities. Without further ado, here's our next episode. Charge the Wave is brought to you by Footnote 4. Footnote 4 dedicates Charge the Wave to the late Duke Kahanamoku from 1890 to 1968, the greatest waterman, pioneer, and American icon of our time, the diversity movement. Today's episode is brought to you by the DEI navigator from the diversity movement. It's a familiar scenario. You've been hired to lead diversity, equity, and inclusion, but you don't have the resources and network or maybe even a job description, let alone a strategic plan and a budget. You need help. That's why the diversity movement created DEI Navigator. This monthly subscription service is designed for small to mid-sized businesses that are committed to DEI action. DEI Navigator is everything you need all in one place. Access to our award-winning team of diversity advisors, expertly curated content, how-to guides, specialized training, courses, and workshops, and a subscription to our micro videos platform recognized by Fast Company magazine as a 2022 world-changing idea. You get all these resources and more with DEI Navigator, and all at a fraction of the cost of hiring a full-service DEI consultancy. Visit www.thediversitymovement.com/footnote to learn more. Candle Cares. Candle Cares is a web tool that helps you be the light for others every night and helps your caregiving crew organize their tasks on a daily basis. Coming soon to Apple and Android. Outrigger Cold Brew Coffee Co. Outrigger Cold Brew Coffee Company is cold brewing the Aloha spirit from soil to sip, waking up the wayfarers with its signature Hawaiian blends of coffee beans and roasting styles, including 100% Kona coffee. Be wherever you may, and whatever your next challenge, we're cold brewing our next batch of Aloha spirit, from soil to sip, to help you charge the wave.
Hi, today's guest is Amanda Diambra, and we are going to jump right in. Amanda, congratulations on the launch and meaningful impact that Arise Health is having in the industry, which we'll get to for sure. But wanted to start and take it back to the beginning, kind of learn about your origin, family, and childhood.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Could you tell us a little bit about your beginnings and where you started?
Of course, yeah. I grew up in Rhode Island, so the smallest state in the country. And funny enough, both of my parents are actually from Rhode Island as well, which meant that I grew up with a very large extended family that was all within 15 minutes of each other. And so it was a lot of fun. We were a super tight knit family, which was really special in a lot of ways, and definitely formative to how I am now in a lot of ways, like the kind of family orientation and also having a large community of folks around you. I was lucky enough that for me that was family. But I think as I think about how that's evolved over my life, it's really been that feeling of community and support surrounding you that's been really important.
Any distinctive memories from your childhood or formative years?
So many. There's so many. I was thinking about this morning, looking at these questions, and they're just. Again, I was so grateful that I had a wonderful childhood, but I was thinking about a couple of things in particular. One was kind of a bright spot moment, and then one kind of germane to like how my career eventually took off in mental health. But the kind of brighter spot I was thinking on was when I was 8 years old. I got my first Harry Potter book. And that just like unleashed this like, whole fantasy world that I could just go into. And I was a pretty shy kid, and there was something just so magical about that. And I loved reading. I loved like diving into these other worlds that I could just be immersed in. And so that just took off like a huge kind of tradition for me. Actually, they always came out around my birthday, and so for years I'd be like, no one talk to me for 24 hours, I'm reading this entire book. And so that was a pretty magical moment getting the first one. And then the second thing I was thinking on a lot was Actually, it was not that dissimilar of a time. It might have been like the year before. My family went on a trip to Disney World. I had two older sisters. They were 5 and 10 years older than me, and my parents wanted us to participate in some like Disney does these weird like I don't know parade things, and they like want kids to participate in them. And I had a complete and utter meltdown, which was probably the first of like 10 complete total meltdowns during that trip. And my parents were like, "Why is this happening? What is going on?" And we really look back on that now and see that as the first time that we really understood that I had such high anxiety. And OCD actually eventually kind of evolved from that. So it's such a like memorable moment in my mind because it was just so clear that like I had all this anxiety and fears and didn't want to engage in these things, which definitely, we could get into this, but it took shape over the course of my life from there.
Definitely. And any other vivid memories you have from growing up?
Countless with my family. My mom's one of 8, my dad's one of 4, and so, like,
Wow.
just so many memories of family get-togethers and all being together, and a lot of holiday memories, and 4th of July parties were always big for us. We did a big cookout, so a lot of good memories from just having family around.
Any role models or mentors in particular?
For sure, my parents, both of them, in different ways and also in how they are together. So my mom, growing up one of 8, her mom was actually a single mom, and they grew up without a lot of money, and taking care of 8 kids is just single mom and also working 2 jobs like that. That's tough. And so my mom, part of what that led her to is being super independent and self sufficient, and also like just working so hard to get to where she is today. So she and my dad got together when they were like 19 and didn't have much to stand on. And they just worked so hard in raising us and making sure that we always had access to education and that we had so much support and love from them. And the two of them, even like they hadn't gotten their college degrees. And so when I was a kid, they actually went back to school at nights when they were working full time. And both of them got their college degrees. My mom went on to get a master's, and like they're all doing this while they're raising 3 kids. Like it was just extraordinary. And my mom continues to be such a hard worker in her career and just puts so much of herself into it. And is just this incredible human. And they also are so deeply empathetic. And from my dad, I learned so much about altruism and putting other people first. Like I have this distinct memory of being in a grocery store, and there was an elderly woman who, was probably lonely and struggling, and she's kind of fumbling with her coin purse and didn't have enough money for the groceries that she had. And so my dad just very subtly, like, doesn't even, it doesn't make a big fuss about it, but he just pays for her groceries and starts chit chatting with her. And just like, he's just such a kind soul. And so that like combination of just like working so hard and being able to create so much for your family and is just amazing, combined with just such deep empathy and kindness.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That's a wonderful story and memory. And before we transition to kind of the career or the entrepreneurship
Yeah.
section, how did you choose your college, your
Yeah.
university?
It's funny. So I went to George Washington University in DC. Definitely would not have been my first pick. However, I'm very grateful that I ended up making that decision because I went because I had a large academic scholarship. I was fortunate that I had that opportunity, and that really sealed the deal. It was where I had the largest scholarship, so it meant when I came out of school, I wasn't going to have to worry as much about uh, very large student debt that a lot of folks are unfortunately having to deal with. But GW is an interesting place. I think I didn't quite find my kind of circle of people who that I carry forward there. Part of that was also I was really struggling with my mental health at the time, and so that comes into play. So for me, actually, those years, the things that I loved were more about being in DC than they were about GW. I studied journalism and politics, so DC was like center of it all. I got to intern at CBS and at CNN and work on the Hill, so just so much cool exposure to that realm of things, and journalism in particular was a great love of mine. So that was a lot of fun, and then I lived in DC for quite a few years after, so that was home for quite a while for me.
And we'll definitely double click on the mental health subject that you mentioned. In terms of kicking off the section for the career and the entrepreneurship journey, Reid Hoffman has a book, The Startup of You. I love it. He talks about treating your career as a startup, hence the
Mm,
title Startup
love
of You.
mhm.
When you began your career, I'd love to know kind of what your thoughts were, your perspective, how you wanted to embark on that journey, and then maybe describe a little bit about your path, your voyage from where you started post college to today.
Yeah, it's so funny because I think you obviously you can't really see the path when you're on it. You can't see where it's taking you. And now I look back and I'm like, my gosh, it was like such a clear progression, like how full circle it I ended up with Arise. But at the time, it obviously does not look that linear. Comes with a winding road. So I coming out of school, as I mentioned, I studied journalism. I loved storytelling. I loved hearing people's stories. I loved being able to understand like who they were and where they came from and why they did the things that they did. And so that love, I really got to funnel that into journalism. My favorite class in college was this feature writing class where we did these like really long, in-depth interviews with different people in our lives and different people in the community. And that was my the greatest piece of it. I also still love long form investigative journalism. Like we could talk about that all day long, but I thought because of that I was going to go into broadcast journalism. And so like I said, I had worked at CNN and CBS my senior year. I was like 3:30 in the morning going up to the CNN building on Capitol Hill, like, doing a very different thing that a lot of college seniors were doing. Because I got to work on a political morning news shows. A really cool experience. And so I had this kind of idea that one of the paths I could take was going into broadcast, and I wanted to be on air. I wanted to be, one of the folks who are actually like delivering stories. I also did love the behind the scenes like production work, but at the same time, like at the time, there were kind of two paths to do that. One was like you could go the local news route and become, someone working in like you would end up in some random market in the country, which would be an interesting experience that I was not quite ready to do. So I just loved DC so much. Or you could kind of go, being a producer and then work your way up at a place like CNN. And honestly, there were two things that made that path not happen. One was being able to sustain you like living in DC on a junior entry position in journalism is really, really difficult. And so that was going to be a challenge for sure. And unfortunate too, right? Because that becomes a challenge for a lot of people who want to enter that type of field. And the second thing that I kept getting stuck on is, and the landscape of journalism has certainly shifted since then, but I was really stuck on this idea that I wanted to work on causes that matter, and it was going to be very, very difficult for me to not have a very strong opinion about things. And so this idea, at the time, like journalism ethics, you had to remain neutral and objective. And so I was grappling with that and instead wanted to really take my career into like, how do I work on the causes that really matter to me? And so I didn't know what that looked like yet. And I joined kind of a communications firm that was in the DC area. And it just so happened, and this again, you don't see the path where it went until you're farther down it. But it just so happened that they did a lot of work in mental health, particularly for veterans. So we were working on suicide prevention programs at all of the VA medical centers around the country and the National Veterans Crisis Line. So it's a lot of work on how do we reach more folks with these resources? How do we build resonance with people so that they can see that they're not the only ones going through this? How do we actually make these crisis resources more supportive? How do we rethink the way that suicide prevention services are actually delivered to folks? So it was it was almost 5 years that I worked on that and just learned so much and just loved actually working with veterans themselves and hearing their stories. And at the same time, the pace of government is very slow. And, they were trying to shift towards better integration between behavioral healthcare, mental health, and suicide prevention and physical care. But it was like you literally had a doctor down the hallway from a suicide prevention coordinator and they weren't talking to each other. And so I really was eager to think differently about like, where is a place that I can go that is going to shift some of this change faster? And so knowing absolutely nothing about the startup world and tech, having been in such different spaces in government and in DC, decided to kind of take a chance and move up to New York because I got a role with a mental health startup, and then it was just a totally different progression from there.
And did you want to mention some of the stops you had along the way before you decided to start Arise?
Yeah, of course. So it's so funny. I remember being at that first company, Quartet. So they were bridging behavioral health care and primary care. So it's like a direct kind of path from the thing that I was seeing in government that was a gap. And I just very quickly got deeply immersed in tech and loved it. I loved the creativity. I loved the different ideas that you could move very quickly, and you could take on these really challenging problems and think differently instead of kind of progressing in ways that had already been done. So there were things about it that I just absolutely loved. But I also remember one time one of the leadership team members there had asked me, like, where do you think you want to go? What is your career going to be over time? And I was like, oh, I'll probably like end up, going and running a nonprofit. Like, I think I'd want to go do that, but like still in mental health, but it would be a nonprofit. And it's funny now that I think about that because that definitely just came out of like I wanted to do good with my work, and so I wanted to make sure that any path that I was taking was going to be like really impacting people's lives, and I wasn't so deeply in tech yet that I really understood like how digital health was fully shifting and the ways that we can impact change in that space. But then, as you do in startups, you get caught up in it, and so I ended up leaving Cortex. I had an opportunity to join Cityblock Health really early, which was just an awesome experience. So for those who aren't familiar, Cityblock is delivering kind of an integrated primary care model for dually eligible Medicaid and Medicare beneficiaries, really focused on how do we impact change in lower income communities. And so I had the opportunity to be a part of bringing that to different states. Again, the thing I most loved about that was working with both the care team members who came from the communities that we served, but also the folks who we were actually supporting, just hearing the stories and what their lives were. So I just continue, again, it was always that human element that I really loved. But at the same time, as I was at Quartet, I was at City Block, I was deep in my own eating disorder again. So one of the things we didn't talk about from my childhood is that I had a pretty extensive bout with an eating disorder when I was about started when I was about 13. After I had been diagnosed with OCD, I went into a partial hospitalization program when I was 14 and missed my first month of high school, and then had ebbs and flows with anxiety and OCD and the eating disorder throughout my high school years. And then had a period in college where it was the eating disorder was less forefront. It was more depression. Wasn't getting any help. And then, I enter my 20s and I'm in startups, and it just hit full force after a series of, life stuff that happens. And so I was really deep in eating disorder during those years, and depression comes alongside that, and anxiety. And so I was trying to navigate that while also being in these digital health companies. Eventually, fortunately, during the years that I was at Brightline, so during the pandemic, I joined Brightline, and really got to be a part of building that company, and bringing virtual mental health care to kids and teens, which was like one step towards the full circle for me because it was, I had experienced it in my younger years. And so, I finally got into my own recovery, was getting into a good place. And again, this, full circle to Arise because I'd been in multiple different digital health companies. I'd done the early stage into growth thing. And the thing that kept sticking with me is like, there has to be something better in eating disorder care. Like there's such a need. There's so many barriers and gaps that existed 20 years ago when I was first getting care. They're very much the same now. And so I just wanted to be a part of like, is there, I kept thinking like, is there something that we could do that would be different than what's out there today? So like I said, it's a winding path, but eventually it kind of came full circle for me.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear the nexus of Arise. Did you want to talk about when you knew it was absolutely time to form the team,
Yeah.
to form Storm and Norm, and kind of the mission of Arise? And
Of course.
would love to hear, yeah, your vision
Yeah.
for it.
I it's funny, I don't think you ever feel fully prepared to go do something like this. I think you have that moment of like, well, I'm feeling I'm feeling bold enough to go like figure this thing out and like now's the time. It's never going to be a good time, but like, I'm feeling you feeling brave enough to go do it. That moment for me was so it was late, gosh, what year was this? What year are we in? 2023. So it was late it was late 2021. I remember so my now fiance is also a founder and one of my best friends since high school who had been he had been with me through even the first bout of the eating disorder when I was 14. And so stood by me through all these years of it. He is a VC actually. And so the three of us were sitting here at my kitchen table in our apartment, and I was just talking about like how frustrating it was that all these barriers still existed, and how hard it was to find care, and how who's likely to get care is like people who look more like me, which is really messed up. And I was just like having this moment of just like such frustration, and the two of them are just like just go start it, like just go start something, like you have so much passion for this, there's a need in the space, like why don't you just go start it. And I didn't think until that moment, and this is still, again, you're never fully prepared. But I didn't think in that moment I was really ready to go do it. But I started to think about it. I started to talk to, I knew I wanted a co-founder who was going to be more of like the product and technology side. So I started talking to engineers and product folks that I had worked with previously in the mental health space, getting a sense for like, is there someone who might want to tackle this with me? And I cold outreached Joan Zong, who is my co-founder at Arise, on LinkedIn. And she answered me within like an hour. We had never met. I just saw she was working at Headspace Health at the time as a product leader, and she was on the board of Project Heal, which is an eating disorder nonprofit. So I was like, she probably has some lived experience with an eating disorder. I bet she gets it. So we had a first conversation, and it was just like instant. It was just like she was already thinking of starting something in the space. We both, it was just very clear how much values alignment that we had right away. And so we started kind of working on it nights and weekends. We would do like Sunday jams at like 4 p.m. And she's in Houston and I'm in New York. So we were like doing this virtually, and
Yeah.
and like 3 weeks in, I was like, I'm leaving my job. We've got to do this thing. Like we have something really interesting here, and like I can't imagine doing this with anybody but you. And so left my job a few weeks later, and then we just started building. And so it's been only a little over a year since we met. So it's been a very fast journey.
Wow, I for one, just seeing it from the outside, have been uber inspired about the team you're putting together, the focus, the intentionality on diversity, equity, inclusion.
Mm.
Um, is there anything in particular you look for when hiring or forming a team of colleagues and peers?
Yeah. Values alignment for sure is kind of foundational for us, especially when you're doing this type of work. So to ask back to your question on the mission of Arise. So really what we're focused on is providing comprehensive and inclusive care for eating disorders and the mental health conditions that come alongside eating disorders. And so necessarily doing this really serious, like complicated work, you need folks who are really going to be aligned with you on core values. And of course, that for us really means, well, I'll just tell you what our three values are for the company. So it's listen to lead. So really, for Joan and I, it was always, you know, we don't do top down leadership. It's very much like, we're listening to understand, we're listening to our team and to our members, and like leading from that place of really seeking to learn. So that was really important to us. All bodies have value is another of ours. So, the broader point there is really, um, being so open and understanding of different perspectives and backgrounds and experiences and identities. And so diversity being a really core part of how we build the team, but also how we show up for each other in a way that's very inclusive was really important for us. Um, and I think it also came down to, like, when we think about those who are going to be ultimately to start up, you're building a business, sustainable growth was really important to us. So making sure that we're really prioritizing the member experience and the provider experience, and not just going as fast as we possibly can, because these are people's lives and these are really serious conditions that we're talking about and working with. So that certainly is it. The other two things that I will say that I always kind of look for are humility and empathy. So we've been very lucky that we've just brought together this incredible team that is so humble, so deeply empathetic, also really hilarious. Like, levity is so important when you're dealing with these really complex issues, and the levity on our team, like just the senses of humor, have been really wonderful. So yeah, I mean, there's so much more. I think about this stuff so much. So there's much more we could talk about here, but those are some of the big things.
And I think you mentioned payers and providers and patients or members.
Yes.
From a health plan perspective, if I was a health plan and I'm saying, oh, in terms of prioritization, eating disorders, disordered eating may seem smaller in numbers. What
Yeah.
would you say to that health plan?
Oh gosh, I wish that were not the case, and I hope that Arise can be a part of shedding light on the reality of how many people are struggling with this. So just to give you a sense, it's estimated that about 30 million Americans in their lifetime are going to have an eating disorder. It's about 9% of the global population that we believe is severely underrepresentative of how many people are actually experiencing this. And, that basically comes down to 5 million Americans a year. So that's even people who are like, this is a known, like, likely diagnosable level of need, never mind the many, many more people who are dealing with disordered eating that could very well become a full blown eating disorder because it's most often going to go untreated. And so of those people, only 10 to 20% of them are going to get into care. And this is not the type of condition where it's like, okay, well, if you don't get care, like, it's fine. It's, you deal with it. It's really serious. This is the second deadliest behavioral health condition after opioid addiction. Like, people die from this every single day, every single hour. Someone dies directly as a result of an eating disorder. And that is not just the stereotypical kind of, thin, white, young woman experiencing anorexia. There are many types of eating disorders, and they show up differently for different people. If you have a different race or ethnicity, or if you live in a larger body, like, this can show up in different ways, and it's going to be much less likely that that is recognized. And never mind that you're going to have access to care. So this is real, and it affects a lot of people. And when it comes to the pair understanding of that, part of this is really understanding what eating disorders are, which is very complex behavioral and medical conditions. And understanding too, like, one of the things that we always talk about with them is, if somebody is experiencing an untreated eating disorder, it's likely that person is going to have spikes on spend and behavioral health and medical needs otherwise, because you have, I'll just give you a personal example. The number of times that I went to a GI doctor because I was having stomach issues, and they would just look at me and be like, "You have an eating disorder." Bye. Like literally do nothing. But I was going to all these, I would do all these procedures to, like, try and figure out what was wrong. And I went to all these GI doctors. So, like, that's a serious medical spike that was completely unnecessary if I had actually had care for an eating disorder. So, there's intersection with chronic conditions, there's intersection with anxiety and depression, which obviously is correlated with higher behavioral health spend. So when you look at the whole person, really, it's important that we not just ignore the eating disorder. And that's not just for people who are going to escalate up to the highest level of inpatient, where it's going to be, $80,000 or more to care for that individual. But it's also for those who, like me, for 5, 10 years are going to live with an eating disorder, and all this medical stuff is going to come up, and, like, we're not actually addressing the reason why that is coming up.
And before we go to break and take a moment, a beat for ads, is there anything you wish you had known when you started this entrepreneurship voyage? It's been within the last year, but in your percolating in your mind for some time.
Yeah. It's funny. I've been thinking about this over the past day. We actually had a board meeting yesterday, and so you think a lot about these types of things. But um, I don't think this was necessarily unexpected, but it becomes very clear is you constantly feel like you're behind and could be doing more. And it's really, really hard to remember and celebrate how far you've come. Like Joan and I met, like I said, last December. And so it's been only a little over a year. We didn't even incorporate the company until last March. So it's been, less than a year. And we have built a team. We've been able to launch in our first market in Texas. We're actually seeing members now, and they're getting better. And it's really, really hard to look at it that way when you're constantly worrying about like all the things you need to do ahead and all the challenges and all the problems and all the things that you need to tackle on the day to day. And so I wish that I had known at the beginning how hard that felt and how hard it felt to actually just like remember how far you've come.
I think as a investor, advisor, entrepreneur, we often talk about kind of cash runway,
Mhm.
financial runway, but we don't necessarily monitor the emotional runway.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
the gas you have in the tank to keep going.
Mhm.
A series of sprints or truly marathon
Yeah,
of the voyage. So with that, let us take a beat for the ads, and we'll return to close out the show.
great.
Charge the Wave is brought to you by the Diversity Movement. The Diversity Movement DEI Navigator is everything you need all in one place. You get access to a host of resources with DEI Navigator and all at a fraction of the cost of hiring a full-service DEI consultancy. Visit www.thediversitymovement.com/footnote to learn more. Outrigger Cold Brew Coffee Co. Be wherever you may and whatever your next challenge, Outrigger Cold Brew Coffee Company is cold brewing our next batch of Aloha Spirit from soil to sip to help you charge the wave.
Hi, welcome back. We're going to jump in to the advice component of this podcast episode. Amanda, is there one piece of advice you have for fellow founders?
Oh gosh, have people around you who get it. For me, one of the biggest sources of support actually has been my fiance because he's also a founder. And there, as much as there are, other folks like my family who are so supportive and encouraging, it's also just so different when people actually have been through it and they get it and they understand like what it is to be an entrepreneur and how hard it feels. And it's very lonely without having that. So my I think biggest piece of advice is like surround yourself with other people who get it. So other founders, and that I think there's so much that translates to how I think about community anyway, right? Like even with Arise, like there's a part of our model that is deeply oriented towards community because we know that connection with people who actually understand what you're going through is just so important. So that would be my number one thing is find your founder friends and like lean into the levity with them.
Any tips for those who are currently feeling stuck or looking for a new opportunity? Given recent news, we've seen mass layoffs at Fang and in the digital health sectors. But even if someone was still at their company and just feeling stuck,
Yeah, gosh, I feel that so much, and I just sending so much care to those folks because I know it's affected so many people in recent months. That feeling of being stuck, this is so easier said than done. But I think for those that are feeling stuck, but there is some inkling of what you wish you could do or what you want to do. Um, if you are able to, I will say, of course, like there are so many folks who don't have the resources to be able to do this. And this is not an easy thing to just up and leave a job and take on something new and take a risk. Like a lot of people are not able to do that. But if you are able to do that and you can take that risk, I would go for it, because there's never, it's much like a lot of things in life. There's never a perfect time. There's never a good time. And so sometimes you just need to just take the leap.
And you're currently, I mean, in the trenches, in the tall grass. You're fighting every day in this startup journey. Are there any mental models, any frameworks, any successful traits? You're working with very sophisticated investors that you've noticed of other successful founders, or that have helped you and Joanne navigate the choppy waters?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I don't tend to usually like archetypes or like that. Joan and I really felt like it was important for us to be ourselves and not try and be like some version of like other founders that we have seen. And that actually has felt like a really important anchoring for Arise in our company, because there's so much that we actually wanted to be different here. And so I would actually say that like being ourselves fully and showing up with with honesty, with transparency, with leading with empathy and kindness, like those are not necessarily the traits that a lot of founders are talking about, but it feels really true to us. And so therefore it's felt really true to the team that we are building. So the biggest thing that I would actually say is, rather than trying to be someone else, like actually find the things that feel really centered and grounding for you, and embrace those things. And I'll say too, like I've seen I used to do like PR and communications, right? So I would like do these like CEO archetypes with like other founders and execs, and like it's not a comfortable place to be. Like you have to be yourself, and that centering I think also helps a lot when your team wants to see transparency and really understand you. Um, Actually, not trying to be something else is helpful.
And I have a host more questions, but let me ask one more before we jump kind of to the lightning round.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll throw it to you. Either what are some particular tools that y'all are using to deal with, rough waters, or weathering the storm, or wreckages, or any particular advice you have for someone thinking of joining a startup this quarter,
Yeah.
maybe from a stable career or from a big org?
Yeah. So to the first one, I'll say to anyone who is a founder or is considering being a founder, um, things are going to go wrong. It is inevitable, and like it is also inevitable that that happens one after another and very quickly. And you're like constantly, feel like you're problem solving and dealing with messiness. Um, I think Joan and I have found that it is that like sense of humor about it and levity, and like again, and I know I've talked a lot about levity, but those two things are so important to me: levity and connection. So like my co-founder relationship with Joan, like I have no, I would not be able to do this without her. The amount of trust that we have in one another, and the willingness to be so open and problem solve together and just figure things out as they come. Having a partner in that, having somebody who can really like just figure that out with you, just feels so much less lonely. And that levity, just it really does help. Like we do these like open team hangs every other Friday with our team. Part of the reason for that is because like we want everybody to be able to come together and like have connection that is not just like doing all the startup things we're doing all the time, but for Joda and me, that's actually like it gives us the time to like, okay, this week has been like, this week in particular has been nuts. And at 1 p.m. today, I get to go see my team who's going to make me laugh. And like those moments are just really, really needed when you're in this. And for those that are considering joining a startup, um, I would actually say be like really thoughtful about the questions that you ask of that startup in an interview process, because there are a lot of startups that are just going to like grow and go really fast, and culture is oftentimes like something that is talked about that is very, it's easy to talk about it and be surface level. We need to actually ask some questions to understand like how do they actually approach this. And so I think getting to know different people and not just leadership level at a company can be really helpful to get to that.
I recently listened to a podcast that said like the three keys to happiness were kind of the quality of your relationships, the
Mhm.
sense of purpose and
Yes.
meaning, and the third is novelty and experience. And I really think about the quality of relationships when you're
Yeah.
spending 16 hours a day with your coworkers in the startup, and the sort of Damocles is hanging over you, and you're trying to untangle the Gordian knot. And I love that you bring up levity over and over and over again, and connection. I have seen time and time again, and I think as people will witness a pattern of these episodes that people talk about the relationships, the culture, the
Yeah,
levity, and that's wonderful to hear. And with that, I'm going to jump to the lightning round if that's okay.
sure.
My favorite caffeinated beverage is Outrigger Cold Brew Coffee Company. This is their endless summer blend. I love it. It's like a
Love
very,
that.
very strong cold brew. Do you have a specific caffeinated beverage that you go to on those long days, long nights?
Every day. I have 2. So, I've got my cappuccino right here. We're very lucky that we have a great coffee shop in downstairs, the benefits of living in New York City. And then in the afternoon for me, it is also a cold brew. It's Grady's, which is a New Orleans style cold brew. So it has chicory in it, and it's like very chocolatey, made locally here in the Bronx in New York.
Oh, wow. And what's the coffee shop downstairs? Let's give them a shout out.
Oh, yeah, it's Le Cafe. It's a little local mini chain in New York.
Oh, nice. Any favorite local restaurant that you would recommend if someone was visiting town for 24 hours?
Oh my gosh, this is a really bad answer because with the pandemic plus a rise, like me going out to restaurants has been very rare these days. So I'm just gonna shout out all the really great little local, like hole in the wall pizza shops and bagel joints in New York because those are
Yeah.
the things that we're most often going to.
Any favorite hobbies, things you do in your downtime when you're not just on the grind?
So reading a lot of news, a lot of New York Times, lot of news podcasts. Music is a huge thing in our household. My partner is also a musician on the side from being a founder, and so we listen to a lot of different things in this house, and he's always playing music. So that's part of it too, and just family time, which for me has always been really important. But we've got a bunch of little nieces and nephews, so spending a lot of time with them these days.
Dream concert?
Oh my gosh, this makes me so sad because I haven't gone to a concert since like 2019 and I miss live music so much. Um, oh gosh. I mean, I wish I could see the Beatles in real life, but that will never happen. One of my favorite bands since college was the Arctic Monkeys, and I actually got to go to my dream concert because I saw them live after like 10 years of loving them a few years back, which was really cool.
Wow, that's fantastic. Any favorite sports teams, musicals, or shows that you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, we've been going to the Knicks a lot. So, my family's not happy about that because 'cause they're all Celtics fans, but loving the Knicks these days.
Best vacation spot.
Oh gosh, I need to go on a vacation. I will say, Fire Island, which is a small, island in New York, where we spend time in the summers. It's really peaceful. There's no cars. It's a special little place.
Dog or cat?
Dog for sure.
If you could shout out to Tim Ferriss, if you could put any advice on a billboard outside a college or university, anything you'd put on that billboard?
Be yourself. I've spent so many years in my 20s trying to be what I thought I needed to be and not just being myself, and I'm so much more comfortable and happy now that I actually feel like I'm who I actually am.
Any other life mottos or slogans that you kind of think about every day or weekly?
Hmm, um, I think, really leaning into, like, just leaning into your people, so, like, your whoever that is for you, your friends, your family, your chosen family, as you said, like, quality of relationships. I think life is so fleeting, and, the time that we spend with the people that we love is so important and special, so, I would say, lean into to people.
Yeah, I'm reminded of one of my favorite quotes. I think it's when a river runs through it. It's like the candle burns at both ends. It will not last the night. But
Yes,
to all my foes and all my friends, it casts a lovely light. That
uh,
temporal feeling, that fleeting feeling.
yes.
Uh, Anything on your bucket list? Do you have a bucket list?
I
For a
do
lot of
not.
people, it would be to start a company. And so I think in one of those ways, you're scratching out that. But is there anything else?
I don't really I never had a bucket list because, I've learned that like setting such high expectations for myself like is not something that works very well for me. So even like starting a company like was less like I want to start a company and was like I need to like do something about eating disorders. So I don't know if I immediately have an answer for that. I mean, I'd love to like sing on stage at a rock band, but I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Any parting words or closing words you'd like to share with our audience before we close?
Yeah, I would just say, those who are either considering being or are immersed in startups, whether that's, as a founder or as somebody who's joined a startup because you believe so strongly in the mission, I would just remember to take moments to actually celebrate the wins and really like be present in where you are right now because it's so easy to get caught up in all you need to do and all that's ahead, and so really celebrating the wins in the moment is something that I'm trying to be better at. And so that would be my parting words for everyone right now.
Well, Amanda, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We look forward to following your successes on the horizon. I'm sure there's many to come in the near future and in time horizon 2 and 3 as well. Uh, for everyone else, till the next time, hope you all charge the wave.
Thanks so much, Ty.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Charge the Wave, focused on entrepreneurs, executives, and icons who are assiduously building companies, cultures, and communities. Till next time, charge the wave. Charge the Wave is brought to you by Footnote 4. Footnote 4 has had a front row seat to many recent successes in the last several years, both advising and consulting for incredible individuals and teams who have risen above their stations by building high-performance crews and cultures, and carving their own paths throughout various industries along the way. Footnote 4 dedicates Charge the Wave to the late Duke Kahanamoku from 1890 to 1968, the greatest waterman, pioneer, and American icon of our time. The Diversity Movement. The Diversity Movement's DEI Navigator is everything you need all in one place. You get access to a host of resources with DEI Navigator and all at a fraction of the cost of hiring a full-service DEI consultancy. Visit www.thediversitymovement.com/footnote to learn more. Candle Cares. Candle Cares is an online tool that helps caretakers take care. Nowadays, caregiving has become a full-time job for one's parents, children, fur babies, and ohana. Candle Cares helps you manage your caregiver crew, loved ones who need care, and everyday tasks. A single candle can light many other candles without losing its own light. Candle Cares helps you be the light for others every night and helps your caregiving team organize their tasks on a daily basis. Coming soon to Apple and Android. Outrigger Cold Brew Coffee Co. Outrigger Cold Brew Coffee Company is cold brewing the Aloha spirit from soil to sip, waking up the wayfarers with its signature Hawaiian blends of coffee beans and roasting styles, including 100% Kona coffee. As Mark Twain famously proclaimed in his letter from Hawaii, Kona coffee has a richer flavor than any other, be it grown where it may, and call it by what name you please. Be wherever you may, and whatever your next challenge, we're cold brewing our next batch of Aloha spirit from soil to sip to help you charge the wave.